All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to get started here. And again, thanks so much for being a part of the Mountain West Regional Conference today. It's so great to have you back again. And I'm really excited that we're going to have Madeleine Pera, who is the Vice President of Programs for Citizens Climate Lobby. She'll be talking about prepping for the next Congress, contingency planning, and strengthening our hand in 2021. In a few minutes here. But first, I just wanted to explain again for folks that if you click on gallery view or speaker view at the top right of your screen, you can go to, that's how you can toggle between the two. And we recommend you go to the speaker view and then you'll see the speaker only on your screen. I wanted to mention at the end of this plenary session, we will have a 10-minute break and then we will go into 3 different tracks. The first will be on this line, which is the climate advocate training. And that is a training that we really recommend for people new to CCL to learn about our methodology and our what we advocate specifically for and how we do it through respect and appreciation. Then in group 2, we have tips from the region, riverine ecosystems, the economic case for carbon fee and dividend, and climate change in Native America. That's all in the second group. In the third group, public health, COVID, and climate change, engaging companies in climate advocacy, and inclusive climate activism. So those are the 3 different choices you'll have. And again, we really recommend folks new to CCL to join our climate advocate training. And for that one, you can just remain on this line. So, it's a really great day yesterday to share with you. And some of the things that really came up to me through the day, as well as getting ready for this conference, was just thinking about how our work is really valuable in working to bring people together who are politically diverse. And that we want to be trying to do that through our values, which I discussed yesterday. And to be building relationships of trust with our members of Congress, with leaders in the community, and to be doing that in a very positive and persistent way, which we do in CCL, and to have that respect and appreciation for all. We do need to act with the urgency, but we want to be able to communicate in a way that appeals to our audience. So it's always thinking about how we want to get our message across, really by starting with that listening part and hearing where people are there on the spectrum of that issue, and then to be working to communicate in a way that is most effective in that situation. So we were fortunate to have Representative Schweikert in the session yesterday, and I was looking back at what he spoke about, and what he was talking and sharing with us was how excited he was about supporting technology advancements. And so what I'm saying here is that he was able to model really for us how we can show thanks for our members of Congress who are making movements in directions in areas that work for them. And in the case of Schweikert, it's his support of technology advancements. But he also talked about things that I thought were really related to CCL, such as focusing on the opportunities we have, building a coalition. Don't try to really stay focused only on convincing others that there's a problem, but rather talk about the solutions that there are out there. And to be another thing that I thought was really great he talked about was to be building relationships with key staff, which is something that I think CCL is really good at, and that shows that over time, those relationships will reward us, whether it's in this office or another, knowing that they can trust and see us as trusted sources. Our work is important. I invite you to stretch yourselves in our climate advocacy and try something out of your comfort zone or do one extra thing. Knowing how important this issue is, I really encourage you to hang in there and dig deep as we go through sort of what will be a politically challenging time in the next few months. But our work doesn't stop. And I actually also look at CCL as, in a way, as being a lifelong practice, in that it's taught me so many ways in how I can improve my skills to communicate with people who I see things differently with, and I've gotten a huge benefit for that. So I just want to say that I appreciate your involvement with CCL. I'm really excited to hear what Madeleine has to say. And with that, I hand it over to you, Madeleine, and appreciate you making time out of your weekend to be with us here in virtual Flagstaff, Arizona.
Thanks, Phil. And I love what you were saying about lifelong practice. I think that's very true for a lot of us. So I just want to say also thanks to everybody who put this terrific event together. I was able to catch some of it yesterday, and for the chance to share some thoughts with you. I want to just start our time actually with a reminder of who we are. So there it comes. Okay, well, so here's what I hope to do just in the next 20 minutes. We'll address the elections. We'll cover what to do to be ready for 2021. That's called strengthening our hand. And I'll remind you to take care of yourself. That's called be gentle with yourself. I don't know if we'll have time for questions or not. I'll see what I can do. But I just really wish I was there in person with you so we could hang out through the rest of the conference and talk. So CCL staff, jumping right into elections, we looked at 3 possible scenarios. There's a lot of variations on those, but these were the broad ones. As part of our strategic planning discussions. In that first one, where Biden is elected and has a Republican-controlled Senate and the Democrats keep the House, that's the easiest one to think about in many ways. We'd have a more sympathetic and moderate president who wants to get something done on climate, and a congressional setup that requires both parties to come together in order to pass legislation. So a lot of what we're doing now would continue to be appropriate, but we'd still have a lot of hard work to do to push carbon fee and dividend through. We need to work hard, actually, on both the left and the right to build up further support. And yet, Republicans could be freer to work on climate without a hostile president in charge. Democrats, of course, would have to work with the Republican-led Senate to pass legislation. In the second scenario, sometimes called the Democratic sweep, where Biden wins and the Democrats take over the Senate, that would be a dream come true for a lot of people on the left. But it'd be kind of a source of worry, maybe deep worry for people on the right over what solutions the Democrats would push ahead on. So this scenario isn't actually a slam dunk for the climate, because in that situation, the left is empowered and pulled to go further left, and the right is going to be pulled to react and go further right. So we have to deal with polarization yet in that scenario. But you could still see the right moving, especially some of it, seeing a need to move more to the center in order to not lose more of their people, particularly younger Republican voters. So as Danny said yesterday, we would want to get carbon fee and dividend into a Democratic climate package if at all possible. And we'd want to see moderates on the right step up to work with Democrats. Those Republican votes might be needed in order to enact legislation, particularly if there are Democratic defections. Now, CCL might be faced with some compromises ourselves in terms of the dividend in that scenario, and in terms of how we relate to what the Democrats are putting forward in the package that isn't carbon pricing. And while we can prepare ourselves and think ahead about contingencies there, ahead of the actual situation, it wouldn't make sense to decide before we know the situation that we're in, like what exactly we would do. What we do know is that we'll keep using our two bottom line criteria of lowering emissions enough to do the job, and of protecting the most vulnerable as we make decisions on legislation. Now, that third scenario, where President Trump retains the presidency and has a split Congress, that one is very hard to face, because whatever else you might think about President Trump, having a president who is hostile to the idea of climate legislation for another 4 years is just very hard. We do expect, nevertheless, that there would still be pressure building within the Republican Party to address climate change. In fact, you can see it building already if you're looking. And so we've continued to push carbon fee and dividend legislation in this scenario. We'd also expect to step up our state level work, both for the emissions gains that come from it, and because it would put pressure on Congress to have the states enacting different kinds of policies. Right, so it's a good thing that we are a persistent, pragmatic, and resilient group of people. We've got a lot of challenges, and we're going to meet them together. This one group leader, what he said a few years ago, keeps coming back to me. He said, "I haven't quit because we haven't gotten the job done, and it simply has to be done." So that's us. So let's think a little more about what does that mean now. First, in some broad outlines, what do we need to do regardless of the outcome that we land in? What can we do now? Well, in all cases, we expect the Energy Innovation Act to be reintroduced, and that we'll be supporting it. And if the Democrats are introducing packages, we'll be working to include that or something like it in the package, again, as Danny said yesterday. And no matter what the outcome, the more support that we build now around carbon pricing and carbon fee and dividend and the Energy Innovation Act, then the stronger our position in every scenario next year. So that said, some of you undoubtedly are finding it pretty hard to think about anything other than the election. And I want to say that I'm really pleased to see all the voter participation and registration work that's being done by our chapters. So please keep doing that, while remembering, of course, that CCL is nonpartisan. And this is also a time when polarization has spiked even higher, and it just went another level in the last week. So if you're trying to pitch bipartisanship or working across the aisle, if you're trying to pitch that to people who are just too emotionally worked up to hear it right now, then consider backing off until after the election. It's okay to wait for a better time to have that conversation if it's not working right now. Well, let's get a little more specific in terms of what we could be doing on climate now to build our support and to strengthen our hand. All right, so grass tops outreach. Danny covered this really nicely and thoroughly yesterday, so I'm just going to share a few thoughts. Your members of Congress, they know what we want. They know we want them to support the Energy Innovation Act. So now what they really need is to hear support from other people, and from particularly people they respect and trust. The thing that's nice is that you can do that by phone and email during COVID, so that work can keep going. And as you're no doubt aware, we're seeing stories in the media, some stories, that claiming that carbon pricing is dead in Congress. Well, my thought about that is this is really belied by the fact that there are 82 co-sponsors on the Energy Innovation Act, and that there are 12 carbon pricing bills in the current Congress, 2 of which were just introduced in the last 2 months. And just last week, the Business Roundtable came out in support of carbon pricing. So carbon pricing is not at all dead. But given this rising media narrative and some of that opposition that's emerging, that's why both Democrats and Republicans need to be hearing from trusted messengers about supporting a fee on carbon emissions. So again, grass tops work needed on both sides of the aisle. I do want to just briefly acknowledge that it can be emotionally hard, and I hear this more from progressives, I think, in CCL, when people from your own political group disagree on the importance of carbon pricing. And, because the expectation, especially among progressives, is that they would be more supportive. And I would just say, don't give up. We'll get there. And just keep finding and lifting up the support where you can. So let's give you a couple of examples. One is from the Southeast region of the reward, and this is focusing on lobbying with community influencers. So in the Southeast, I'm just going to quote from one of our liaisons there about the rewards of adding a business leader to a lobby team. The liaison wrote, "A congresswoman is very difficult on climate change. She just doesn't think the government needs to do anything. We've had 2 or 3 in-district meetings with her and never got anywhere. So for our last meeting, I decided to invite a friend who's an owner of a small textile company that's endorsed HR 763. Before the meeting, I explained the bill to my friend and sent him some information about the bill. The meeting itself was not going well. I had also invited a high school student, and the congresswoman was lecturing her about riding the school bus and planting a trillion trees. Finally, there was a lull, and my friend chimed in. He said he and the congresswoman were probably the only Republicans in the room. He told her about the Incredible Bread Machine, a book about capitalism his father gave him in college, about how capitalism has created lots of wealth, and that he likes HR 763 because it harnesses the power of capitalism to solve the problem of climate change. I'd never seen our congresswoman so engaged as during her discussion with my friend. His exchange with her was one of the most effective discussions I've seen in a lobby meeting. Now, on the Democratic side, a chapter in the Midwest with a very progressive Democratic member of Congress was able to include in the June lobby meeting a leader from the local 350.org chapter who supports CCL's work, a professor of environmental economics, and a Democratic state representative who'd endorsed the Energy Innovation Act and that their member of Congress was supporting in her bid for election. So, but lastly, I just have to share on this theme, this bit of work from your region, from Utah. They held a town hall meeting with Representative Curtis, and we put a video with clips from him in it. So I'm going to play that.
Of course, the climate's changing. Of course, decades and decades of the Industrial Revolution has had an impact on the climate. Why are we afraid of that? Let's get that behind us and then move on to the conversation of, now what do we do about it? How can we advance Republican values and show that we do have answers and that we care about the earth? If we don't take a seat at the table, can we really complain about the discussion at the table? Can we really expect to recruit and retain the upcoming generation of Republicans if we can't look them in the eye when we talk about the earth? This is a Republican bread and butter issue. We care about the earth. Now let's show it. We have to stop being so afraid of this conversation. We've got good answers. We've got answers that don't kill the economy. We've got answers that can be bipartisan. We're in this. We want to be part of this. I believe strongly that not just Republicans, let me just say Utahns, care deeply about this earth and about this planet and want to leave it better than we found it. Everybody can line up behind that.
Let's see. There we are. So that was lovely, just lovely work, folks in Utah. Thank you. That was great for, I think, CCL volunteers all across the country from the left to the right to see that. So just a smidgen about grassroots voices. Those are also very helpful. Two good ways to do that during COVID are to promote our monthly calling campaign. That's the quarter-page flyer on the right there. I got stats from your region. You added 40 new callers in the last 30 days, and 147 calls were made in that time. So great, good work. And then we started, rolled out a virtual postcard campaign with the last action sheet. And here's a really beautiful example from your region. This campaign has to be organized locally at the chapter, district, or state level. It's not something that we're going to try to manage from headquarters other than to give you the template and materials you need to do it. But I think these postcards with their beautiful pictures and the individualization of people's personal messages, I think those have the potential to make a really good impression on members of Congress. What I want to touch on just a little bit next is diversity outreach. As the slide says, we need everyone. With the whole country awakening and debating and protesting and paying attention to racism now, well, what are we doing about that in CCL? Well, for one thing, in CCL, we believe in working on ourselves as a matter of integrity. So that's one big place that we're starting. We've been working on staff training and reviewing our hiring systems, on further developing training for volunteers, on building up a cadre of volunteers who are focused on outreach to people of color in their region. And that's just some of the things we're doing internally. In terms of working with environmental justice groups, CCL staff, most notably Danny and Mark, that you heard from yesterday, they've been and are continuing to build relationships with leaders in environmental justice groups wherever they can. And those meetings are typically private and confidential in order to enable a frank and open discussion. So we don't name names or announce them, which is kind of hard because mostly between us and staff and volunteers, we want to be as transparent as we can. But one outcome of those private conversations has been that our DC staff has also been able to make some introductions between environmental justice leaders and legislators on the Hill, so that they can make their own case about what they want to see in climate legislation and have a seat at the table. So again, we don't announce this, we don't name names, but Danny did say I could tell you that much, and I hope you like knowing that. And I do hope that you were able to listen to the September National Call with Tina Johnson. As the director of the National Black Environmental Justice Network, she spoke really frankly to us about racism and equity and about the challenges that we face. And it's worth a listen if you missed it. Well, what about conservative outreach? That continues to be very important, of course. We've created a position called State Conservative Outreach Lead, which was pioneered by Ian Harrison in Colorado. And we're building that up across the country. And our conservative outreach fellows are also doing some impressive work in the media. And that's been opening doors to other conservative organizations and conservative conversations. So we're continuing that work quite a lot also. So I want to ask your help in making CCL a truly inclusive organization. To reach our goals, we need everyone. And yet, keeping people with different life experiences and different worldviews together in one organization, that takes a lot of work and a lot of listening and trust building. So I just want to say a little more there. I've been doing a lot of listening. And when I've listened to volunteers on the left lately, sometimes I hear discouragement about the lack of support from the right, and particularly evidenced by the lack of other Republican co-sponsors joining Representative Rooney on the bill. Left or right, we all wanted to be further along by this time. But I wanted to say that I have not given up on right of center people and politicians. It's just self-evidently more difficult than we thought for Republican members of Congress to come on board publicly, and yet the progress is there. We see it in the polls, in the support of younger Republicans, in the responses of members of Congress in our meetings, and of course in the words of your own Representative Curtis. And I see it in my own Republican family members who want something other than climate denial and Trump, but emphatically don't want to become Democrats. In fact, my sister just joined CCL. And what I hear from our right of center volunteers is that CCL matters really deeply to them as a place where they've been able to be themselves politically and work on climate. And so when our left-leaning members occasionally slip up and paint all Republicans as anti-environment or racist, well, they feel kind of unwelcome. And when the left part of this organization gets super excited about a possible Democratic sweep, well, they feel kind of worried about that, we turn to solutions that don't work for them. So there aren't easy answers, but I am committed to keeping us all together. And I believe that you are too, or you wouldn't be here in CCL. So thanks for being like that. All right, real quick on be gentle with yourself. It's a time of stress. I handle my stress in a lot of ways. I exercise, I spend time with my family, I avoid too much news, and I let myself cry over it sometimes. But mostly, I keep busy. I keep busy with actions that I can take, and you guys help me with that. So some of you are like me in that these kind of times make you want to work harder than ever. And I'm so grateful and impressed for the good work that's happening across the country. But if you aren't like that and you need some permission to just sit back a little bit, please know that's okay too. Just look after yourself and come back when the time's right for you. We're going to need all hands on deck in the new Congress. But I do say, don't isolate yourself during these last unsettled weeks before and probably a bit after the election. Make plans to be together remotely with CCLers and keep each other strong and resilient. So I'm just going to end with the last part of the paper that Mark quoted yesterday. I think those words are worth hearing twice, because as challenging as it is to, just as it feels to be an American these days, whatever party you're from, I love the people of this country, and I love our democratic ideals, and I love you because you so often remind me of what is good and precious in our country. And don't we all need those reminders? So here's those last words from Mark yesterday. We have no time to waste. Our constitutional democracy is only as strong and resilient as our belief in it. For love of freedom and equality, for love of country, for love of one another, and out of hope for a better future, we need to reclaim our bond. If we turn back toward one another, we can transform our institutions. We can renovate our Constitution. We can elevate our culture. We can at last achieve a true democracy. Okay. I only left you 30 seconds for questions. I don't think we're going to have them, people. You know how to find me, though, a lot of you, and you know how to find each other and Bill Barron for your questions. Thanks for being with me and hearing me out.
Thanks so much, Madeleine. I loved what you were sharing, and I love that in the quote about turn back towards one another. And I think that's, I'd like to leave it on that note as we work in this environment that we're in, and just, like you said, appreciate each other and be supportive of each other.
Yeah.
So thank you for making time to be with us today, Madeleine. And now we're going to transition to slides for an intermission between this session and then the 3 separate choices that begin at 1:40 Pacific, 2:40 Mountain Time And those different choices are in the chat if you do not have them in an email before you. And so if you are joining the climate advocate training, you can just stay on this line. Otherwise, you can move to the other lines. And with that, huge thanks to you, Madeleine, as well as all the planning team and Flagstaff who made this conference. And just great appreciation to all of you who are participating today as well.